Hello everyone, my name is Markus Schnappinger. I'm with the Technical University of Munich. I'm going to present joint work I did with my supervisor Alex Pretschner and Arnaud Fietzke, who is with the company Itestra. The goal of our research is to predict software maintainability. And we not just aim to classify code into good code and bad code, but aim for a more fine-grained ordinal classification. Classification and prediction implies the use of some sort of machine learning. And yes, that's right, this is machine learning based research. And for that kind of research, the most important question is, which data do you use for your experiments? What code do you analyze and where do you get the ground truth? Luckily, we are in quite a comfortable situation and can use an existing data set. Actually recreated the dataset less than a year ago and published it at the ICSME conference. And it is also available on Figshare using that QR code or the URL below. In total, we have access to 519 labeled Java code files that are taken from 9 different projects. Unfortunately, as you can see from the pie chart, the data is quite imbalanced. There are just a few data points that are considered hard to maintain or very hard to maintain, and the majority is believed to be easy to maintain or very, very easy. So this poses a challenge for machine learning, and also 519 data points are not that much, but the dataset is still way larger than other comparable datasets, like, for example, the Lee and Henry dataset from 1993. So for this experiment, we have to dig a bit further into how the dataset was created. Because we showed code to the experts and asked them about the quality of the code using a Likert scale that corresponds to these 4 classes that you've just seen on the pie chart. Now, several experts rated the same code snippet, and then we aggregated their vote using an aggregation algorithm, and then come up with the aggregated consensus label. And this is the label that we use as a ground truth in our experiments here. Now, since the label is the aggregation of several experts, we can find that the single experts don't always match with that consensus. In fact, we can compute basic machine learning performance metrics like accuracy or mean squared error and find that the experts have an accuracy of like 70%. So then we also compute the mean squared error to measure how severe misclassifications are. So if you are wrong, how far away are you from the actual label? And because we have an imbalanced data set, we also use metrics like Matthew's correlation coefficient and Cohen's kappa. Now, since we can compute these metrics for the human expert, we can use them as a reasonable as a reasonable baseline to compare the performance of our machine learning classifiers with. So now let's go to the machine learning part. We have talked about what is the label, which is the ground truth here. But what is the input? As the input, we decided to go with static code metrics, but we did not use a special metric suite like the OOC metric suite or CK metric suite to avoid bias towards a pre-selected set of metrics. Instead, we used several static analyzers that are out there and used in practice, like, for example, SonarQt or TeamScale and some others. Got all the metrics from them and unioned them. Now we end up with quite a large number of metrics, as you can imagine. Therefore, we have to apply some sort of pre-processing, like feature selection. And because these metrics have varying scales, we need to do normalization and standardization. And what we also did to cope with the imbalanced data distribution is to do oversampling. That is a technique to balance out an imbalanced data set. Sometimes that has positive effects, and sometimes that actually has negative effects as well. but we tried that and made good experiences here. Now for the machine learning classifiers, we did a pre-study to identify the most promising ones, because it's just not feasible to implement and run all possible algorithms. And we found the 6 most promising algorithms to be random forest, k-neighbors classifier, logistic regression, extremely randomized trees, gradient boosting, and ADA boosting. And for these 6, we did a hyperparameter optimization using a grid search and ran every experiment 30 times to mitigate the effect of randomness. What we also did is binary decomposition, and what that is, I will explain on the next slide. So much about the input, the pre-processing, the training. Now for the evaluation, we use these 4 metrics that I have already introduced on the slide before: mean squared error, accuracy, Cohen's kappa, and Matthews correlation coefficient. And we compute them in a project-wise cross-validation. That is because in practice, we find that an assessment is done on project level. So when I assess a project, I know nothing about the project. I was not trained using code from that project. I know nothing. I was trained on different data from different projects. So we mimic this here and use 8 projects for training and evaluate it on the 9th project. And then we do that 9 times so that every project was the testing set once. This actually leads to worse results than doing like a 10-fold cross-validation, shuffle the data, ignore project boundaries, and throw it all into one pot, and then do cross-validation or training test splits. But we think this project-wise validation makes more sense and is a little bit more realistic. So I already teased to explain binary decomposition. And this is a technique to split the classification that happens on an ordinal 4-part scale. We have these 4 classes, and we can split this into binary decisions. For example, we can start at the median and ask a classifier whether the code is rather good or rather bad. Not directly jump into, is it very good or good, bad, very bad, just is it on the good side or is it on the bad side? And then if the classifier predicts that it is on the bad side, we can use a second classifier to distinguish bad from very bad code. And we can do this for the second branch here just as well. And that actually has some nice opportunities, because it has, first of all, the possibility to optimize each step individually. For example, for this classifier, you can use a random forest using 10 features. And here you can use gradient boosting using 3 features. Here you can use k-neighbors classifier using 15 features. And you can easily replace these algorithms and play with different feature selection or pre-processing techniques. Another advantage for practice is that you can customize the decision threshold of each classifier. So in our experiment, we just used a 50% decision threshold to not bias the results too much. So, but in practice, what you can do is to tailor the decision threshold of, for example, this classifier, and assign a threshold of, for example, 30%, so that a 30% confidence that something is very bad already qualifies to assign the very bad label to that code, so that you, for example, have a more recall-oriented setting. Now let's fast forward to the results of our experiments here. And for that, we compare the binary decomposition results, the multi-class classifiers that I introduced the slides before, so random forest, gradient boosting, and so on, and compare them to 2 baselines, one being the human level baseline as the orange line, and a zero rule baseline as the blue line, which is a bit off here in the chart. A zero rule baseline is a dummy classifier that just always predicts the most frequent class. So in our case, that classifier just constantly predicts this code is easy to maintain. And that yields to a Cohen's kappa of 0, and Matthews correlation coefficient of 0, and accuracy of 54%, and a mean squared error that is like off the chart. But interestingly, if we look at the human level baseline, we can see that the mean square error of the human level baseline is actually above, that means worse, than the results that we got in our experiments. For Cohen's kappa and MCC, we can see that this is actually very close together. And for accuracy, it's also close together, but if we zoom in, we can see that actually the multi-class models and the binary decomposition models perform a little bit better than the orange baseline for the human experts. It's not that much better. It's just like 2 percentage points. But we're talking about the human level baseline here. So just reaching it is actually a great success. And the success is even bigger for the mean square error, where we really have some nice improvements. For Cohen's kappa and MCC, they're very close together here. And also in numbers, the differences aren't that big. So what do these numbers mean? What are the conclusions of the research? First of all, the prediction results are not perfect. We're talking about an accuracy of 70-something. But concerning the accuracy and mean squared errors, our models perform better than the average human, because the average human expert is also not always in alignment with the consensus of several experts. So if we can achieve these good results, we can basically have the same confidence in the level as we have, and the same confidence into the predicted label as we have in the human expert. What we also did in the paper, but I didn't have time to elaborate on that here in this small time slot, we also analyzed in detail the misclassified files. So if our models predicted the wrong class, what did they predict and how severe is that? And we found that actually sometimes very good was mistaken for good, or bad was mistaken for very bad. But good and bad are rarely interchanged. And another series of experiments we did was a binary separation of good and bad. So we have these 4 classes, very good and good, you combine them, and we have bad and very bad and combine them, and then have a binary separation of these 2 classes. And for that, we can actually achieve an F score of 91%. So if you're just interested in a coarse grain analysis, is the code rather good or rather bad? In a binary setting, we can do that with an F score of 91%. However, there are some threats to validity, but they are mostly related to the dataset and are also explained in the paper that corresponds to the dataset. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your question and the ongoing discussion.